Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be showing you a crazy mission that I came up with, which is, and I'll have to speak slowly for this, an SSTO, which is vertical takeoff and landing capable, inside of an SSTO, the one you're looking at now, which is going to take us to orbit. This is kind of overpowered to accommodate a lot of different payloads, but the only you might have noticed those massive rapiers on the back. The only mod that I used for this video is TweakScale. I could have hypothetically just put a bunch of rapiers on this vessel and achieved the same result, but TweakScale is just a great way of fairly adding weight and adding size to make something more practical. And for a vehicle of this size, it needs big engines. Now, kind of my inspiration for these SSTO videos is this idea that single-stage to orbit vehicles are really cool and useful for making a reusable vessel, but they're not very practical for getting all the way to Laythe or any other really far body. What this vehicle is most capable of is just getting heavy things into orbit, because a vehicle that is perfect for taking off from Kerbin is not going to be perfect for flying through space. Now, I'm coming in for the landing of this, like I said, after one orbit. The most practical way to land this vehicle is to just point it prograde, because it has a bad problem of being torn apart anytime you try to tilt it up the way you would the space shuttle. And I am doing that a little bit here, but I ultimately decide to toggle my fins, and they all toggle in different directions. They deploy. I do this because they are much more heat resistant than the aero brakes are, and it doesn't change my trajectory if they're all kind of pointed in different directions. So I'm coming in for the landing. You've seen it probably 1,000 times, this exact landing profile, but it's always very exciting for me. My favorite part is landing. When you first start doing SSTOs, you're convinced that this is not possible. A lot of the time it isn't, because you didn't make a plane that was designed to be capable of landing. That's the hard part of designing any planes in Kerbal Space Program, is that they might be good for taking off, they might be good for high altitude use, low altitude use, but they're not ever good for everything. Now, that landing wasn't perfect. If I were a real pilot, I might have to go to some committee hearings or something, but it did land completely intact, completely reusable. So, this single stage to orbit vessel is on the tip of that rocket there. This rocket is just providing me, a way to get to Laythe. It's nuclear powered, so it's much more efficient than the rapiers that are attached. So I am, on a trajectory to Laythe. This isn't really a video on getting to Laythe, that's why I sped it up a lot, but a little bit of advice I have. The way that I consistently and reliably get to Laythe is by going into orbit around Joule just above Laythe, a slightly higher orbit than Laythe. Then, as you can see, once you are intercepting Laythe, you're basically already going into orbit. It's not hard to do the capture burn. So, I've broken off from the bottom stage now, and I'm going in for the landing at my base. It's just a couple of vehicles, gas, refueling vehicles. I have the base mod, but I kind of got bored with it, so it's somewhere over there. I came in for the landing with the VTOL. This plane would have been nearly impossible to land without that vertical takeoff and landing capability, because Laythe's atmosphere is much more thin than Kerbin's. It is a dream once you get into the air and you're trying to get into space with a single stage to orbit vehicle, because the gravity is so much lower on Laythe. You can get like twice as high off of the surface as you need to just with the jet engines when you're doing this. Now, the vehicle I'm launching now is a plane specifically created to refuel vessels in orbit around Laythe. I had another refueling vehicle, but it required a runway, and that's not practical on Laythe for a couple of reasons. Like I said, you need to be going very fast in order to take off on Laythe because the atmosphere is so thin, and there's no runway. Initially, when I was building this base, I kind of resorted to landing planes in the water and pushing them over onto land. That works, but it's also extremely tedious. So I'm using that bottom stage from the original mission to rendezvous with the plane because the plane doesn't have monopropellant or anything. It would just be a pain to do that. So I designed this bottom stage to be capable of, rendezvousing with whatever it needed to, docking with this refueling plane. This went pretty smoothly. I just needed to refuel it. This vertical takeoff and landing, single-staged orbit, refueling vehicle, that is a mouthful. Doesn't carry that much fuel. I don't think I was able to completely refuel it all the way, but I was able to refuel the rocket enough to get home after we reattached with the other plane. Now I'm backing off from my refueling vehicle, and we are almost ready to take off. I want to make sure I'm taking off at an ideal time to rendezvous. And slowly taking off there. I try to not use the vertical takeoff engines that much because those are not jet engines, those are rocket engines. So it does burn a little bit of oxidizer to do that. This was the only practical way to do this. In this game, there aren't really any compact jet engines that would help me get off the pad, unless my vehicle were extremely light. And even this vehicle presented some challenges with that. So I just went ahead and used rocket engines. You do end up seeing those a little bit later too. And now I'm coming in for what I thought was going to be docking, but I clearly forgot a step in this process. So I'm kind of awkwardly shuffling around next to this collection of vehicles. But I'm going to go ahead and dock. It's going to look a little bit different than it did before because it doesn't need to fit inside of an MK3, and I didn't want to put a docking port on the front or back of this vessel, so I put it smack dab on the top, right in the center of gravity, so it'll be able to get home pretty easily. And then there's this awkward docking thing that happens when you use the Lown method, which is to say I'm pointing both of the docking ports at each other and simply drifting. Normally, like when a vessel docks with the International Space Station, the International Space Station doesn't turn to accommodate it, but I do that because it's easy. Now I'm landing the vertical takeoff and landing SSTO refueler. Anytime I try to do something that I don't think anyone's ever done, it always turns into like a really, really long explanation. Like, okay, this is the first time anyone's ever put a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, SSTO, inside of an SSTO, taken it to Laythe, and returned. That rocket inside might technically be cheating, but I don't care about that. I think it's cool. I think it makes the mission cooler. And I am coming in for a landing. Just gently puffing those VTOL engines, because this thing also has a habit of destroying itself every time you land it. All of my planes have that problem. I guess most of them do. I'm not very gentle with them. But back to this. I am now doing my escape burn to get out of Laythe's atmosphere, or Laythe's orbit, going into Joule's orbit, and then also going into the Sun's orbit. This is a lot to juggle at one time, admittedly. That's why I had to do this little correction burn on the way back. But this is boring. Being in the middle of space is boring. That's why I sped up through it. Being at places is so much cooler. Now I'm doing the capture burn to get back to Kerbin. I couldn't aerobrake with this because SSTOs are notoriously difficult to aerobrake with, especially escape velocity. So, adjusting fuel a little bit. Now, these two are going to break apart and land separately from each other. This landing is actually easier to do on Kerbin than it is on Laythe, in my opinion. Basically the same thing. We're just barreling through the atmosphere. I slow down at the absolute last second. That's normally my tactic for being right on point for this KSC. actually landing at the KSC, I know, is a huge barrier to overcome when you're playing around with these. So it just takes practice. It just takes a lot of eyeballing. And I decide I'm going to land in style. I've been gone for like 5 years. So, bam, right on the hell. Oh. Not content. I take off yet again. And then, bam, right on the helipad. That's how they make things happen here. That's just what the astronauts wanted when they got home, to climb more stairs. And as you can see, the launch vehicle is still there after all these years because I am the only person who does anything around here. Now I'm bringing back that lower stage, and this took a couple of attempts. It's hard to land this precisely, but I'm back now. All three are in one piece. Don't pay attention to what's going to happen when this lands. And thank you all for watching. Please give me feedback if you can think of any.